Chair Moore.
Here.
Alder DePula.
Here.
Ms. Fallett.
Here.
Mr. Homburg.
Here.
Mr. Stein.
Here.
Mr. Grice.
Here.
Ms. Fox.
Here.
Mr. Chapman.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from February 10th?
Motion approved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Any changes, corrections, additions? Nothing? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We're sticking with the order of business. We don't appear to have any appearances,
I don't believe so.
and everybody up there is from
Yep. that's the
applications in front of us. Okay, great. So we'll, there is no unfinished business. Number 6, number 7A, public hearing on the request by Republic Electric Company for approval of a zoning permit for a new HVAC and electrical product distributor at 1206 Fenway Drive, case number 2-009-2025. The floor.
Looks like we're joined by Scott and Ed. If you have,
Okay, Scott, Ed, if you have anything to share with this commission as well as the public about your request, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. This is Scott Nicoletto. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Republic Companies. I did submit a packet with all of the requested information. Hopefully you have that. Republic is a 108-year-old company, 10 locations now with a recent acquisition, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, and now Wisconsin. I was told that we needed a zoning permit because the building that we have leased has been empty for more than a year. And just here to answer any questions we can and help get the permit.
Great. Is there anyone else from Republic that's here to say anything? Or
Hello, this is Ed Snipe. I'm also here with Republic. Don't have anything to add. I think Scott summarized it very well.
okay, thank you. Then, assuming there's no one else here to for the public hearing portion, we'll close the public hearing and go to number 7B, consideration of action on the request by Republic Electric Company for approval of a zoning permit for a new HVAC and electrical product distributor at 1206 Femright Drive, case number 2-009-2025. Floor?
yep, so the request here tonight is for a new use zoning permit for a wholesale distributor of HVAC and electrical products at 1206 Femright Drive. A zoning permit is required because the building has been vacant for greater than 6 months. The last tenant being an auto parts wholesaler, Pioneer Rim and Wheel Company. The property is located within the Community Design District, which is intended for a compatible mix of residential, commercial, industrial, and open space uses. In the 2016 Comprehensive Plan, the current and future land use maps identify this site as commercial in use. So the proposed use aligns with the Comprehensive Plan vision and is compatible with adjacent businesses, which includes commercial and industrial. The building is 15,750 square feet with approximately 1,000 square feet of finished space and 775 square feet of that to be customer facing. Minor interior renovations are planned for the finished space to accommodate the new business. No exterior modifications are planned other than the addition of security lighting and security cameras. As far as parking, the zoning code requires industrial uses, which includes wholesale distributors, to provide a minimum of 4 spaces or 1 parking space for each full-time employee during a peak shift, plus 1 space for each commercial vehicle to be stored on site, and 1 visitor parking space for each 500 square feet of office space. Materials state that the business will have 3 full-time employees and 2 delivery vehicles. This would require 7 total stalls, given the size of the customer-facing area. And there's 9 parking stalls available in the front of the building, as well as a staging area in the rear that can be used for the company vehicles. As far as circulation, the site's accessed via existing curb cuts on Femrite Drive, which are to remain. Site circulation is not expected to be an issue with the existing layout of the docks. On a site visit, staff noted that the parking lot is in decent condition with a few small areas near the building that could be filled, and the front area is in need of restriping. Landscaping is currently in good condition and no changes are planned. As far as lighting, the applicant intends to add security lighting to the north side of the building. A photometric plan has not been submitted at this time, and it's recommended that the applicant just work with city staff to confirm that lighting is appropriate and there won't be excessive light trespass. Hours of operation are to be 7 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. And for signage, the applicant had submitted a separate application that was approved by staff under the new sign ordinance that allows for the staff review and approval of certain signs. Plans were shared with city department heads for review and comment. Fire Chief McMullen had a few comments addressing fire alarm testing and the installation of a Knox box. And staff recommends approval with the conditions as listed.
Thank you very much, Thor.
There's someone waiting in the room, Teresa, to be let in.
Oh,
Okay. With that, I will open it up to the commission. Chris, do you want to start on this one?
Sure, I think it's a fine use, it fits in there really well. I have no issues other than I would suggest we add a couple trees. There's only one canopy tree is kind of over on the east side, next to that one driveway. I would think one on the west side by the driveway they use, and either one in front of the building or mid-span where all that is a 10-foot wide terrace. There's just nothing there, nothing on the street, nothing other than that one tree. So I think the other comment I would have for staff is that if there's a little more than 3-foot candles of trespass in an industrial area like this, I don't think that's a bad thing. You know, the more lighting, the more secure it is, the better. There's no residential nearby. It would be if it got to a point where it was really an impediment for the residential, but I don't see that here, so I don't think a little light trespass above and beyond the residential standard would be a bad thing.
Corey?
I agree. I think the use is appropriate, and I have no other comments.
I also agree, and I hadn't thought about adding trees, but I like that idea because it is sparse in the front. The only concern I had, I guess, was the asphalt in the back. Staff notes say that it could be filled. I think it should be filled. There are some kind of crumbling areas up against the building, and there's a strip of what will be potholes pretty soon across the middle, and it just gets pretty rough. So I think there should be work on that in addition to the striping of parking, but otherwise, I think it's appropriate.
Okay.
No additional comments.
Okay. Patrick?
I really don't have anything to add, other than what's been said already. So
Okay.
I think it's a great use and solid business for the one.
Okay. Brendan?
I agree, no additional comments.
Okay. John?
All looks good. The only comment I would make is I think the comments that were made, I think would be addressed by the building owner, not the building tenant typically. So that's all I would add.
That's correct.
True.
Yep. Okay. With that, I would be happy to take a motion.
I'll move approval with recommendations as written by staff, condition 6, where it says formal parking lot striping, add and repair plan shall be submitted to city staff for review and approval. And then add a condition 7 that 2 trees be added to the site with staff approval of location and species.
Okay. So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. I have a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? No? Okay. Motion carries. Welcome to Monona.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Okay, with that, I'm going to go to new business C, informational presentation and possible discussion from Soul Smart regarding zoning review, solar standards for the city of Monona, case number 2-011-2025. And I'm going to let Thor introduce this informational presentation.
Thanks, Chair. So this is really a request, follow-up from City Council, who last September adopted a resolution to pursue Soul Smart designation, following a recommendation from the Monona Sustainability Committee. Soul Smart is a program funded by the U.S. Department of Energy to help local governments remove barriers to solar market development and to implement national best practices to expand solar energy use. Participating communities are recognized with bronze, silver, gold, or platinum designations for achieving certain benchmarks in 5 focus areas: permitting and inspection, planning and zoning, which will be our focus tonight, government operations, community engagement, and market development. As a prerequisite to earning any designation in the planning and zoning category, Soul Smart completes a comprehensive zoning review to identify restrictions which intentionally or unintentionally prohibit the development of solar systems. So tonight we're joined by our Soul Smart technical advisor, Zach Wyman. It looks like he's online. Zach's going to be going through the zoning review memo and also a short presentation on just what Soul Smart is. So I'll turn it over to you in a little bit, Zach. I won't go into too many details here in this memo because Zach will be covering quite a bit of that, but just a high-level overview of the Soul Smart zoning review. They assessed our zoning code for barriers to solar development and the use of best practices in 4 categories, and that's a solar purpose and definitions, roof-mounted solar, ground-mounted solar accessory use, and ground-mounted solar primary use. In summary, our zoning code currently doesn't address solar development at all. It doesn't include solar definitions. Solar systems are not allowed by right in any zoning district, and we don't specify development standards. So in some cases, this lack of specificity acts as a barrier because it leads to potential uncertainty around what is or is not allowed for a solar PV system. In other cases, it aligns with Soul Smart best practices because it means we haven't implemented strict development standards that maybe hinder solar development. The memo notes that a zoning code should be tailored to each unique community need. It does provide recommendations, and our technical advisor can help us tailor that in the long term if we pursue that option. And it also notes that incorporating clear solar zoning regulations can help streamline the solar development process, increase transparency for property owners, and reduce the cost of solar installations. Dane County went through the Soul Smart process, and they were the first county in the U.S. to earn platinum designation. As part of their pathway, they developed a model solar ordinance for Wisconsin communities. That model ordinance is included as an attachment to the memo included in the packet for your reference. So the goal for tonight is just to consider the findings of the Soul Smart zoning review and discuss what additional information is needed from staff and from Soul Smart to inform the Commission's decision-making process regarding streamlining solar development in the city. The Commission may choose to discuss priorities for solar development and if you would like staff to prepare zoning code amendments. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Zach to give his presentation and go over the findings of the zoning review.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to be here. Can you all hear me okay?
We can?
Okay, great. And Thor, are you sharing slides?
Yep, I'm pulling those up right now.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Just a quick introduction for myself, Zach Wyman. I work for Cadmus. We are a subcontractor on the SolSmart contract, and we are one of the technical assistance providers that has been in this role since the program first began in 2016. Next slide, please. Just a disclaimer. Can review it if these slides are sent out afterward, but I think we can go ahead. So just today's agenda is just a real quick introduction to the SolSmart program. Thor hit on a lot of the major points. And then the main reason we're here is to discuss the best practices in zoning for solar energy. I'll give a quick overview of that process, supplement some of the items that Thor hit on, and then we'll look specifically at the community's PZ1 zoning review. I'm happy to get interrupted whenever with questions as they come up, but can hold time afterwards to answer questions as well. Next slide, please. So SolSmart is a national designation and technical assistance program. I think we're almost up to 550 local governments that have been designated to date. And our goal is to make it faster, easier, and more affordable for residents and businesses to go solar, and also take off some of the administrative burden from developers and the community themselves that are involved with solar projects. And how the program works, it's a designation that recognizes communities that have taken key steps to address local barriers to solar energy and foster the growth of their local solar market. So Thor made some of those points. I will just note that it is a program focused primarily on soft costs and some of those categories that Thor went over. So it's not a grant program. We're not handing over money to get systems built, but we're really targeting the planning, zoning, permit inspection, and some of the other parts of development that can rack up costs that are eventually going to be borne by the community members that want systems involved. The developers will pass those costs on to those who are installing the system, and that's what we're trying to avoid. And just wanted to make it super clear that my time and our technical assistance through the SolSmart program is available at no cost. So can ask for anything is what I usually say. I might not be able to provide it, but I will never send over an invoice for anything that we do through the SolSmart program. It's all paid for through the Department of Energy, and we just have a scope that we can deliver on. But nothing related to the SolSmart program will ever come at a cost to the community. And just to give a sense of how we provide this TA, it's calls like this, webinars, there's training. There was a national training last week, and those are pretty regular. And then we have an online resource library, templates for how to implement some of the best practices that the community covers. All that we ask for in exchange is that communities commit staff time to working towards SolSmart designation and a commitment to achieving designation. So it's not checking a box and then 6 months later you get a plaque in the mail saying you're designated. It is a partnership throughout the process. Next slide, please.
One second.
Thor hit on the different designation levels that you can achieve. I will focus just on bronze. Bronze is, well, each designation level, there's prerequisites, so requirements. So even if you achieve gold, you have to achieve all the bronze and silver prerequisites that came before that. And then other elective criteria, there's almost 100. And that's kind of a menu of options that communities can choose from. So if planning and zoning is in good shape and the government operations criteria aren't really going to hit the points that the community wants, you don't have to focus on that. You can focus on community engagement or market development, but there are minimum standards that accompany each of these designation levels. I'll just add that the bronze designation level in particular, which is the zoning review is related to, it's really about increasing transparency with a permitting and inspection checklist and a zoning review. you don't necessarily have to change any processes, but it's making sure that folks at the community are aware of what's out there and what is best practice, and then making sure a resident who's interested in installing roof-mounted PV can easily log online and quickly see what are my permit requirements to get a system built. It could be far from best practice and require 10 different steps from that person, but at least they'll be able to go online and see exactly what is needed of them, and the same goes for the developers. They at least will know what they're dealing with. And then as you move up, there's more complicated or time-intensive prerequisites and additional points required to reach those levels. So those are higher level of effort and higher bars to meet. You can go to the next slide, but I think this one will be super quick. Yep, so all the criteria that we have are in one of these 5 buckets. And the PZ1 zoning review is the bronze prerequisite for the planning and zoning category. So every single community that has been designated has gone through the PZ1 zoning review process, and that is what we use as a starting point at the beginning of every SolarSmart engagement. Just so folks are aware of what is out there, the SolarSmart Program Guide is our comprehensive resource that, one, helps implement solar best practices in the community. So it's that full menu of options with all the requirements listed, every criteria, the description, why it's important and is included, templates for how to achieve it, examples of other communities that have done so in the past, and then other resources as applicable. And it also helps communities navigate the SolarSmart designation process. So that's part of my job, but the program guide is there so you can always quickly see what you'll need to achieve any of these designation levels. And then those requirements are just over to the right to give you a sense of what you need for each designation level. So the first step is, we call it the intake process. So after you submit your solar statement, which is the first bronze prerequisite for every community, it's just that initial commitment. Sometimes city council reviews and signs it. Sometimes it's just a sustainability committee member or someone else from the community that is offering their time and saying, we're committed to going through this process. We then complete 2 steps on our end, so the baseline assessment and the PZ1 zoning review. The baseline assessment is really just our initial take on what the community has done, so it helps us show the community that you're really not starting from square one. Monona had a great baseline assessment. You've already taken several actions that qualify for points under the program. So it helps us say, hey, we don't actually have 96 criteria to work with. You really only have 4 or 5 things that we need to focus on, and then you'll reach designation. And it also gives the program a useful tool for evaluating ourselves. We don't want a community that comes to us with a ready-made gold application and then lose sight of the fact that we didn't really provide any technical assistance there. So it's a helpful process for both sides. So that's step 1, and then the second step is this PZ1 zoning review that we're going to talk a little bit more about today. So we can go to the next slide, please. And then one more. Just to give a sense, I'm not sure how much time folks have had with the zoning review. These are the types of things that we're talking about when we're talking about solar zoning best practices. So explicitly recognizing and addressing the different forms and uses of solar PV. So that's having a statement of why you want to promote solar PV and having different definitions for a roof-mounted residential system versus a large utility ground-mounted system, creating by right or permanent installation opportunities, setting clear and predictable standards that balance solar resources and development with other resources and land uses, avoiding unintentional barriers, which Thor hit on, and then just accurately capturing other community priorities. So if you want to encourage solar in historic districts, there's clear guidelines for that. If you want to promote ground-mounted solar PV, there's clear guidelines for you can do that, but we would also like to see these co-benefits of pollinator species co-located with those systems. And then just the umbrella over it all is maintaining consistency with regional best practices. So very high level, but these are the types of things that we're thinking about as we're reviewing the zoning code. The next slide, please. So the PZ1 zoning review process, and sorry, PZ just means planning and zoning, and 1 means it's the first criteria in that category. So we, as the TA provider, review the community zoning and land use regulations. Then we update the PZ1 template, which I believe is the file that Thor said you all have in hand. And we update it with community-specific feedback and recommendations, including suggested improvements and additional language that can support the growth of solar in the community. And then once that is complete, the community reviews the PZ1 document, ensures that the information looks accurate. So if we review the 2023 code and there was a 2024 solar ordinance amendment that we missed or something, just want to make sure we reviewed the most accurate and up-to-date information. As long as that all looks good. The bronze prerequisite, just a requirement, is considered complete once you all review it and then return a signed copy of that file. Down here at the bottom, just want to be super clear that this review and your signature is not an endorsement or recommendation for changing or updating the code. It's really just there for informational use only. So the community signing it is not a commitment that will implement these changes. We just want to make sure it's been reviewed and folks are aware of this, the recommendations in that file. And go to the next slide. So Thor already went over the document structure and the fact that NODA has the benefit of Dane County, who's already developed a Wisconsin solar model ordinance, and along with a ton of other great resources. They were the first platinum county in the country, and I was their TA provider as well, and they're great to work with and also very eager to share information if folks have questions. CARP-C, the regional org, also got designated as part of that effort. And just something helpful to keep in the back of your mind before we jump into the document that being silent on solar PV is not best practice, but it also removes any need to go back and tear away barriers or red tape. So starting with a blank slate is not the worst thing. And we often have communities that are starting in a similar place as your community. Take the PZ1 as an initial template or outline of this could be our solar zoning ordinance if we choose to go that route. Rather than weaving it throughout the code, they just adopt a 3 or 4 page standalone amendment to the code and use the PZ1 as the foundational language for that. And we can get into more of this in the document itself, but the structure of the document in that orange, it just says what are we talking about right now. The TA provider then checks the code does or does not include this. If it is included, we reference the code language in the box below that's blank here and the section that it comes up with, or the section that it is contained in, and then we have suggested language. So we don't just say, you don't have this, figure it out. We try to say, if this does need improvement, here's some recommended language you could consider and why it's important to consider this topic. So I will stop there and we can go through the PZ1 itself, but are there any questions on anything I went over so far? Just trying to keep it quick.
Any questions?
Okay, I'll pull up the PZ1, Zach.
Great, thank you. Let me pull it up myself. Yeah, so I don't want to sit here and read through the document. I'm sure you've all had a chance to at least skim through it. But if we start at the top, that's just the introductory language. So we didn't find any hits for solar or renewable energy related information in the current code. And then if you scroll down a little bit, Dora, that best practices review and recommendations following the structure that Dora mentioned at the top. We start with solar purpose and definitions on page 2. It's just important to make sure the solar purpose for the community aligns with community goals and that definitions are contained in the code. Sorry, Thor, can we go to, awesome, I think I'm a little behind here. And then the definitions, it's just important, sometimes there's broad solar energy definitions and solar energy requirements, but again, we don't need to, we know enough now, there's no need to treat a roof-mounted residential system the same as a 2 megawatt system in an open field. So clearly defining those and having specific regulations for each use case does help the process go a lot smoother, or at the very least removes the need for someone who just wants 10 kW on their roof to go through a lengthy process that's really set up for the worst case scenario or the biggest impact to the community of a utility scale system going up. They just don't require the same level of scrutiny. And then if we can keep scrolling down to the roof-mounted solar PV section, this is really the core of what the program is focused on, is roof-mounted accessory use solar PV. So those residents and businesses that have the primary use structure there and they are just wanting to put solar on their roof or in their backyard. I will note here that down at the bottom of the roof-mounted solar PV section, below the suggested language, you can also see what criteria adopting this language is applicable to. So adopting or allowing accessory use solar PV to be allowed by right in all zones, that is a gold requirement. So all gold SolSmart communities have codified in their zoning ordinance that accessory use rooftop solar PV is explicitly allowed by right. And then if we keep going down, we talk about roof-mounted solar height, which is the primary barrier that we see a lot. Any questions on roof-mounted? I know the ground-mounted is less of a focus, so I want to make sure there's time for any questions on this.
Doesn't appear to be any questions.
Okay, and I can always go back, sort of make sure we cover everything. So also a section on ground-mounted accessory use. So this is like a business having a 20 kW ground-mounted system in their backyard or in the back of the business or backyard. We talk about ground-mounted solar setbacks and placement requirements, ground-mounted solar lot coverage and impervious surface requirements. So that is something we'd see here is like you don't need to require the whole footprint of the system as impervious surface if it's just a pole mounted system, as long as it's not mounted on a concrete slab, it isn't pervious. So those are the types of things we're talking about there. I know ground mounted solar primary use has not been a major concern for the community to date, so I will not spend much time there. And then the barrier review is the last section of the document. Our process here is we have a longer document, internal things that we check for barriers to solar PV. So again, not having any mention of solar in the code, your community doesn't have any barriers to solar PV that we need to undo, but the types of things that we do look out for. So if you do adopt a solar zoning or solar ordinance in the future, things to consider, roof mounted solar screening, is not viewed as a best practice, limits the system visibility, aesthetic standards, glare, glint, and noise standards and testing requirements, really not necessary for a roof-mounted system. Roof space coverage limits, so saying commercial buildings can only have 25% of their roof covered in solar. Prohibition on flat or low-slope roofs, and so on and so on. You don't have any barriers, so the suggested language is just really saying why this is important to think about, and not include in the negative implications it can have on solar development if those barriers are present in the code. And then at the bottom is just a quick summary and the signature page. So that's our document, that's our process. Happy to answer any questions if folks have had a chance to review, if anything doesn't make sense. But yeah, just signing this is a acknowledgement that it's been reviewed, and that would achieve this criteria.
Okay, thank you, Zach. Do you have anything else to add there?
No, again, the purpose of tonight's discussion is really an informational presentation, just overview of what's going on in our zoning code as far as solar goes, and then if the commission chooses, if you have any clarifying questions for Zach, he'll stick around, and then we can open up the floor to discussion if we want to, discuss what information is needed. If you'd like to discuss, priorities or potential strategies, we can do that. And if you'd like for staff to prepare potential zoning code changes, we can make that request as well.
Corey?
So I'm trying to understand what the ask is of us for tonight. So are we asking you asking the city to sign, or is that gonna happen regardless of what we do? Okay,
Yeah.
so then it's just an opportunity for us to have a discussion, and
There's no consideration of action or
It's
vote
just-
or anything like that. It's just to bring everybody up to speed and to let, of this program, and to let Thor know now or ever. It doesn't have to be right now, but if you have questions, or if you want to think about whether or not, given this report, whether or not zoning changes would be helpful, or you think zoning changes would be helpful, just share it with staff and with myself and Patrick as members of the council, based on what you're hearing.
I'll start.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, Zach. I guess I see the value in pursuing zoning ordinance changes more for kind of protection than removing barriers. I don't know. I've never felt like we've had barriers to solar development necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's something in like building height restrictions that could be there, but I do see some value in having some protections, I guess, for how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly for solar in a lot of cases. And then I have a question too. Does the council have a desire to expand our ordinance to include solar? Is it open for discussion whether we're gonna do anything, or do we need this to improve our designation?
No,
A lot of questions.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, the council certainly approved having this analysis done by SolSmart, but I don't know that, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that the council had any predetermined expectations in terms of what would come out of it or what we wanted to come out of it. We just thought it was of value to look at our ordinances in relation to best practices.
And no changes to the code are required for us to
Right.
still earn a bronze designation. For instance, there's other actions we can take, there's other strategies to get to there, if that's the end goal, is just to get to bronze designation. But I think council's goal in passing the resolution wasn't just to earn a designation, it was to assess solar market development within the city and remove barriers and implement best practices. This is just one piece of the puzzle that is required as part of that pathway to do this solar zoning review.
Well, just reading the resolution, it does say announcing Mona's commitment to becoming a Soul Smart design community, so there does seem like there's a lot of interest on the council in pursuing this, which I.
It's just a standard document. It's
Okay,
not,
it doesn't sound-
Yeah.
But it's not, it
Yeah.
seems like a statement of intent, so I think
Yeah.
it's right, okay. Which I don't have a problem with that, but.
right.
I thought it was really interesting, and I think, yeah, I mean, pursuing it for protection reasons, but I think also just for encouraging. I mean, I thought in looking at the model ordinance, there was a lot of good language in there that I thought would be helpful for people to see, and, yeah, I think it makes sense to.
Okay. Anybody else? Thoughts? Chris?
Well, excuse me, I think it's a great discussion to be having, because I think in general, the commission at least has been very much in favor of solar. But
Yes.
we also have zoning ordinance to protect people from each other, and then we have to somehow make them work together. And I think it's great to have this reviewed by someone independent that looks at it all the time. Of course, they looked at it from the lens of what's best for solar, not necessarily what's best for our community. And I saw in this a lot of areas where he talked about rural areas, they would approach it differently than urban. We're certainly very urbanized. So,
Right.
for example, I would say for a major installation ground mounted, we'll have reviews. We'll have lots of reviews before we'd allow that. I don't know where it would ever happen. I don't imagine we'd want to tear down Kohl's, we can put in a solar array and lose all that tax base.
Right.
And, short of doing that, we don't
Right.
have an area for it. So my focus, when I looked at, I've got a lot of areas tabbed, but focus really, to me, what we should be focusing on is the residential and then with our commercial projects. And we've never really had a problem with commercial project, but I have an issue saying, if we have a height restriction that, but if you have solar, you can go 10 foot higher. I have an issue if you're in a backyard, you say, but if it's solar on top of your accessory structure, instead of 12 feet, you can be 22 feet in the air. That would be burdensome, I believe, to the neighbors. I think that's something we'd want to look at. I think having something in our ordinance that says, by right, you can put solar on the roof of your house, as long as, and they've got language in here about it, as long as it matches the slope of the roof, and it doesn't, in that case, they say it doesn't exceed the ridge line of the house. So in that case, you haven't obstructed anyone else's rights. Your neighbor might not like the fact of how it looks, but I know in a lot of areas, some of the areas where we have deep restrictions, all we ask them to do is instead of putting up a galvanized structure, make sure anything that you can see is like black, painted black. So it's not obnoxious. And we do the same thing here with fences. We have some
Right.
black vinyl coated instead of galvanized. But I think to have that in there, and so a homeowner knows by right you have this, it just really goes to building inspection for structural, I think that would be good to have. At least they know what can be there and what's allowed. I think some of the ground mounted stuff, I would, if I were a neighbor, I'd have some issues with a 20-foot high solar array right next to it and what it could do. So
Sure.
I think those are discussions we need to have.
Sure. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had the same questions, I think that Rob was asking earlier, what are we trying to do? Like, what's the issue that we're trying to look at? And we definitely have emphasized the importance of solar at the commission, and so having something that is in alignment with that, I think, is really good. But when I was looking at the materials, I would be reluctant to incorporate a lot of that until it became something that we really needed to be addressing. The roof-mounted solar makes sense to me. The ground-mounted, I hadn't thought of that as being something that would ever be permitted by right in a residential area. That was really something that I just hadn't thought about before. So that would be something, if that was of interest by others on the commission, I would want more information about that. But because to me, the roof mounted makes sense. And I would be concerned about safety. They say it's not impervious. However, there was something in the model ordinance, I think, that talked about compaction. If it was like a heavily compacted area, it would still, even though it wouldn't be on a concrete base, it would still be impervious. So I would just want to, and I guess I wasn't sure what the benefit would be of incorporating it into the existing ordinance versus what Zach had just mentioned with having it as like a standalone, not a stand, but like an appendix essentially, or like our design guidelines. So I'm curious, what would be the best approach if we were going to do something like this? And let's see. Yeah, I mean, if we haven't really been having challenges, I wouldn't want to overdo it, I
Right.
guess. We have, we talk about our staff and the time
Right.
that they have, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
So actually, that was going to be something that I was going to ask Thor, because I'm assuming as part of this analysis, you guys looked at it. One is, I would say, and one, I guess, question for Thor and a question for Zach. A question for Thor is that, is your impression from people, because we do have a lot of residential solar, maybe not as much as Colorado or California where there's more sun, but there's increasing number of people that are putting solar on their rooftop. So is your sense that the process that we have for those approvals, which is no different, I would imagine, than most construction, is your sense that there is a barrier to people?
I haven't heard directly from any property owners that it is a barrier.
Okay.
I would have to check with Doug what his experience is, because this come through his desk primarily, right?
Yeah.
So, as far as residential solar installations, we don't get that many every year. It just is handled through building inspection, essentially. We get a building permit for solar. Doug reviews it to make sure that it doesn't have adverse impacts to neighbors, and that hasn't come to fruition yet, but he'd be looking at glare and angle. We do have a determination from Attorney Cole that at least in our single-family and two-family zoning districts, the roof solar doesn't count towards the maximum building height, so a solar installation on the roof could exceed that. So
Could you repeat that?
we have a determination from Attorney Cole that solar could, in single-family and two-family zoning, could go in excess of building height.
Can I ask a follow-up based on Zach's?
Any excess?
He said they did a search of it and solar didn't come up.
Mhm.
So how is it in our ordinance if?
Is that because
So-
of the absence of any language?
It might be. I would have to check on the details there. I'd be happy to provide that follow-up information to the commission. But at least for now, so if a building is at the max height and they ask for solar, the solar installation would not go into the determination of building height.
Okay, that's interesting.
Mhm. And then in the commercial districts, typically the process would be we get an electrical permit after zoning approvals, and in that case, Doug's looking to see if it's impacting the building's architecture, if it's visible from the street, essentially. What the roof line is like. Is there a parapet that can hide the solar? So, most recently, the Madison Pediatric Dental Office at the former Rutabaga site, after all their plan commission approvals, they came back and applied for solar, rooftop solar, and they did install it. And no commission review was required because it was not visible from the street, totally hidden by the roof.
And that would be true, by the way, of the first current building as well. They have solar on the roof, and that didn't have to come back to us.
Right.
It's
Dave Jones Plumbing,
right,
same thing.
right. Dave Jones Plumbing, right. Yep. So my
Actually,
question for Zach, related to the same thing as the flip side of that coin, which is have you found, given that you have 550 communities or whatever in your bailiwick, have you found that communities that have built-in ordinances or language into their ordinances, have you found that there's been an uptick, an increase in solar interest as a result of what one presumes is the intention to clarify for the general public, for those that might be reading ordinances at night before they go to bed or something, or interested in solar, you know, does it, have you noticed, for those communities, has there been an uptick? Either because of it's in the ordinance or because they have this classification of being platinum or whatever. Zach?
Yep. I know there was some level of study done. I don't want to speak offhand on what exactly the evaluation metrics were. But I can dig that up. I think it's public facing now. It was just an evaluation of the program and its impacts. I'm just gonna make a note of that. But I think speaking off of memory, I think the gist of it was it's difficult to tell how do you know this person wouldn't have installed solar if there wasn't clear permitting and zoning requirements? Would they have been gotten off the idea because they couldn't find the information they wanted or not? It's difficult to say. So I don't think we're going to get a clean answer on that specific uptick in solar installations in SolSmart versus non-SolSmart communities. But one of the big benefits of the program is developers are aware of it, and there is a big SolSmart presence in Wisconsin, led by Dane County and some of the regional organizations. And there is some level of consistency that exists for those developers as well. So if they work in one SolSmart community and then go to another, they know that the community is supportive of solar. They know some minimum standards that have been adopted by the community, and that they're not going to have curveballs thrown at them out of left field that they weren't expecting, or delays in the permitting or inspection process that they couldn't foresee. And one of those big benefits of having it actually in the code or processes outlined is if staff do turn over, there is a actual written policy to fall back on. So we often, one of the first questions we get is, we're silent, but this is how we do it. It's not an issue, but taking that one extra step of actually writing those processes down, so it's not looking to over-regulate or get into every single scenario, but for at least the most common scenarios, having those explained in the code and in a checklist for permitting inspection processes, it does just make sure consistency over time, no matter who's implementing the processes, they are there and everyone can see them. And some folks that are interested in solar might not know how it's always handled, and then they can quickly find exactly what they're looking for in a easy to understand way. Because we don't think anyone is reviewing, or many people are reviewing zoning codes in their free time. So pulling those key details out and making them readily available for the layperson interested in the idea is one of our main goals.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Well, first of all, it doesn't surprise me that Dane County is the only county that has adopted this, because I think they're a very sustainable leading county.
Yeah.
And I think solar's hot, right? No pun intended, it's hot right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to put solar in a project or in a building ranges from about $2.50 to $3.50 per watt. In 5 years, that's projected to go to 50 cents per watt. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
If nuclear and fusion doesn't get in its way, which some people believe it will. I'm guessing, Zach, there's some correlation between what I would say more sun-friendly communities than non-sun-friendly communities. For instance, Denver gets more sunlight than 10 times probably more than we do in Monona. So I'm guessing they're more wanting to adopt something like this because they get more energy out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess where maybe I need a little clarification is it seems you did a report, so I assume they were hired to do a report. And you were asked to look at two things per the staff report. And one of those was to assess barriers to solar PV development. And later on, it says that our zoning code does not specifically address solar development. So I take that to say that there are no barriers to solar development. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think a few people have kind of alluded to that. We wouldn't want any barriers, and I think we're open to that. And I think, I don't know if we need to change anything in zoning, but I think if a project or a developer or a resident were to want to put solar in, I think the second part of your report, which was to provide the use of best practices, I think that would be great to add somehow to our zoning. So if someone was considering it, these are the best ways to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then one more question. It looks like you're trying to have Monona become a Soul Smart adopted community. And I take it the next step would be if a person that owns a home or owns a building or is a developer wants to get Soul Smart approval or accreditation on their property. I would guess they'd go through this checklist, much like a LEED project would for sustainability, or much like a Park Smart would for parking. And they would have to fill out so many points and have your team or someone review it. And that would cost a fee. That's how the other accreditations work. Is that where this could go? Maybe to talk about where is this going? Is that the ultimate, that if our community says we like this, we're not mandating it, but then as a owner of a property, I want to have my building become Soul Smart qualified or accredited, that I would then go through the process using your guidelines, using your parameters, and then you would check it, and my property would either be a bronze or a silver or a platinum, depending on how many points I get. Am I speaking the right language?
I can just jump in here that our program does not go any further than the community level.
Okay.
So we have community designations and then county and regional organizations. So the spirit of the criteria is all the same. They work together, but we understand that a regional organization doesn't have the same levers that they can pull as a community. But we do not delve into anything that like a LEED certification is or anything at the property owner level or building level. We stop at the community level, and we can help the community with any specific questions you have. For example, I've done feasibility analyses for communities. Like hey, as part of this, we want to look at solar feasibility on our town hall, and we can work with the community on that, but we're never working directly with residents and businesses, and there's no Soul Smart designation for anything smaller than the municipal level.
Okay, thank you.
So it
That's all I
sounds
have.
like what I'm hearing is that we think, and correct me if I'm wrong, which I know you'll do because you're good at that, that's why you're saying, but it sounds like what I'm hearing is people think that having some framework or some language in the ordinance or in our ordinances would be a good thing to provide some definition, but we don't want to go overboard. And it seems to me the next step in that would be for this, based on the feedback you got tonight, for the staff to work with Zach and the Soul Smart to come up with something that, without extending a huge amount of time on it. That's why we have Soul Smart, and then,
To that point, I was gonna ask, to what extent is technical assistance provided free? Is it,
it's free.
Well,
It's all free.
so they'll write a draft ordinance for us, or how much can we put on their plate
Zach, do
versus our planning staff?
you want to answer
Yeah,
that?
so
Zach?
we can work, again, we can ask anything, and then I have to go back and see what can we do and what can't we do, but there's never a cost associated with anything that we say yes to. But we're probably not, we're not writing a solar zoning ordinance, but we can work with the community to say what what parts of the Dane model ordinance do we want to adopt and not adopt, review draft language, provide feedback on that. We've had communities take the PZ1, say, okay, we took your recommendations, we left some others, here's our draft ordinance, we're gonna bring it to council for approval, can you take a look at it, like, do another PZ1 review with our updated draft ordinance before we bring it for approval, because it's a long process, we don't want to get something approved that we later find out there was barriers in that we didn't think about. So that's the kind of level of effort that I would say is typical for that particular example. Does that help answer the question?
It does, thank you.
And just one other thing that came up earlier, I mentioned that some communities have adopted a solar-specific ordinance because they don't want to weave solar into their existing code, or sometimes communities just closed an update and they're 2 or 3 years out from revisiting the code. There is no preference on that with the SolSmart program at all. It's whatever works best for the community. Sometimes it's easier to just adopt an ordinance, but other times we're working with the community while they're doing a major code update, and it is integrated right into that process. So mentioned it as an example, but by no means is one viewed as better than another from SolSmart's perspective. Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
I will say, I have reviewed several zoning or solar ordinances in my line of work, and a lot of them, most of them that I've come across are separate, but they're very dependent on what type of community you're working with. And like, if you're not bound by Madison, then you're looking at large scale, solar farms that are 5, 10 megawatts or whatever. And those ordinances that I've seen are very pro-residential rooftop. It's not very difficult, and it's much more stringent for agricultural development, or taking agricultural production out of development in those communities. And they get very particular about cultural and natural resource review, avian flyways, FAA, fire department. Like, they're very, very, very thorough in what you have to do, wetland delineations, and so our situation is very different.
That's right.
We're not looking at solar fields, but I think what's already been said is true. I think there's room for protections, and certainly we don't want barriers for poor development and best practices.
Right. Yeah, I would say the one, in interest of full disclosure, I would say that the one time I recall mentioning the prospect of ground solar here in, well, first of all, it's safe to say that our Public Works Department, Brad specifically, looked into smaller parcels that the city owns, that we're just wondering if we could, by square footage, generate enough solar and make it worthwhile for the city to utilize that. And it wasn't worthwhile, so but excuse me, but then the other time I remember also mentioning it was around parking lots, and specifically around Nahuska parking lot. I remember it coming up. I mean, I remember it coming up with the current too, but I guess less. And it was raised at Nahuska because there are parts of the country, including Colorado and Southeast, where they've put solar in parking lots, because you get a double advantage. A, you're collecting the energy from the solar that are installed in the parking lots, and B, the cars that are parking in those parking lots are not baking in the sun. So the amount of energy that's extended by the cars, that's because they stay cool. And in other parts of the country, right? In the other parts of the country, it's grocery store lots and places like Ahuska where, and I thought about Ahuska, like I said, it was interest of full disclosure from my viewpoint. I thought about Ahuska because I thought, okay, well, nobody could complain about, ruining their view because the only thing is the cemetery across the street, right? You're not blocking a view, as an example, or somebody's, because you've got residential across the street. But it has happened a lot in other countries and certainly in other environments where you have more sun, where parking lots have become a really positive thing. So it's obviously not on the ground, it's raised up off the ground, but it's still ground solar, and it's worked very successfully, like I said, because I'm not suggesting we need to tackle it at this point, but just wanted to mention that we do have a lot of, to put it in Joni Mitchell terms, pave paradise and put up a parking lot. We're good at that in the United States, so. All right, do we have enough direction? Do we have any other questions for Zach? Do you feel like you have enough direction?
Yeah, so I think the ask is to put something together, but not go into too many details. But right now it's an advantage that we don't have any barriers, like John mentioned. So I think, whenever we prepare, we'll ensure that there aren't additional barriers, but putting some I think protections was brought up a couple times. So we'll build something with that, and we'll also clarify with Attorney Cole about the height thing.
Yeah.
That was a concern.
Yeah,
Susan?
well, I think the silence is the thing to think about, and I think not to the point about ground mounted solar, I can't imagine many people wanting to put that in their houses. I would think rooftop would always be important. We have so many substandard lots, and if people were going to do that, you might need a basis to deny them permission. I mean, you can't if you don't have any rule. I mean, I guess that's my other concern, is just not to be heavy-handed with restrictions, but if we don't have any, then we don't have any basis for denying them to do that if they want to do it. I think doesn't seem real likely, as I said, but
Yeah.
I don't know, that's just another thing to think about.
It's a good point, 'cause I don't believe we've ever had an application for ground
I would be
mounted solar.
surprised.
So right now, it would probably be a consultation with Attorney Cole about how do we handle this. Is it just an accessory
Well,
structure,
certainly with the
or
height
is it something
issue, yeah.
different? Yeah.
So it's just,
Are we silent on wind as well?
I believe so. At least
Yeah.
in the zoning code, we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just-
Yeah. And actually, there are some vertical turbines that have been developed, and I know several people that have looked into those too. But for the purpose of tonight, we're just talking about solar.
I'm just saying, could someone put up a 50-foot pole on a turbine in their backyard?
Yeah.
Is there any ordinance?
Yeah. So if there aren't no other comments, Zach, thank you for coming and presenting tonight and for doing the study.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
thank you.
Okay. With that, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is Thor's. Computer's gone dead. Come on, there we go. Sorry, but my computer died while we were doing that, so, yeah, economic development updates.
Yeah, so the Topgolf project, they're looking to record their CSM and easement releases and filings within the next week or so. And then for potential upcoming plan commission items at our next meeting, which will be the March 24th date, we will be holding both meetings in March this one. We're expecting 2 new use zoning permits, some smaller ones, and then the River Place project that we last heard from back in November. They'll be coming back for consideration of approval for their GDP and Phase 1 PIP. For that meeting, you should expect packets to arrive 2 days later than normal, so on Wednesday, just given the timing of the meetings and Doug's out of office, we'll just need the extra time to get all the materials ready. So just wanted to set that expectation.
So, yeah, so instead of it being Monday, you'll get it on Wednesday, because he doesn't get back until late Sunday. He's on vacation, right? And he's gonna need some time, so. Okay. Any requests for information from city staff? Yeah. Oh, Chris?
Well, I have maybe one to explain. The first application we had tonight, it's odd, like, why are they even coming? And the reason, I'm probably the last one alive that remembers it, but we changed our zoning ordinance quite a while ago because we had a lot of properties that kept having a new use without really being a change of use, and the property never ever got upgraded. And one of the biggest reasons we did it was for pylon signs, because when a property changed hands, they just kept going and going, and we never had the opportunity to, well, like the one tonight, you know, I'm sure there's trees there when it was originally built, they just die and they don't get replaced. It gives you a chance to look at that, gives you a chance to bring properties into compliance. For example, all the ones with pylon signs, they were grandfathered in, right? But they were grandfathered into that owner. Now, when somebody else buys that property, they buy it knowing what our current ordinance is, and it lost the grandfather status because they knowingly bought it knowing they would lose that pylon sign, so they no longer had a value attached to it. So it seems funny, like that one tonight, why do we have to look at that when it was an obvious no-brainer to put them in that building? But that was the reason we changed our zoning ordinance years ago, was to allow us to just have another look to see if a site needs to be refreshed or where it's at. So I know sometimes it's like we shouldn't even be looking at this, but that was why.
Okay, great, thank you. Anything else? I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a second. All those in favor say
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. We're early. Who was on the under?
I won.
Nobody was
I
on
won.
the under. I knew it. I was on the under.
I think Kareem, oh no, you won, you're right, you said 20.
Yeah.